We thought the cabin was our refuge from the storm, until the forest around it moved, as if something colossal was stirring beneath the soil. And what crawled out of that darkness was never meant to be seen. Tonight, Dread Scribe writes again. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from, and if there's a story you'd like me to cover next, I'd love to hear it too. The silence was the first thing that felt alive. After months of sirens, traffic, and the relentless hum of city life, the absence of noise in that forest cabin was almost unsettling. It pressed against my ears like a held breath, too dense, too deliberate. I had come here for peace, a weekend to reset my racing mind. But the stillness felt less like calm and more like waiting. The pines outside stood like sentinels, unmoving even in the breeze, and the air carried the cold scent of rain-soaked earth and old wood. By the second night, I noticed it, a sound so faint I thought I'd imagined it. A low rhythmic hush seeping from the walls themselves. It rose and fell like breath through cracked lips. Wind, I told myself, forcing a laugh that didn't sound like mine. These were old logs after all, and the forest was never truly silent. Yet the sound persisted long after the air outside had stilled, curling through the cabin's bones in patterns too measured to be nature. Like someone trying to form words but trapped behind the wood. I pressed my ear to the wall, half mocking my own paranoia. That's when I heard it clearly, a drawn-out syllable, soft but deliberate. It was my name, whispered once, then again. My skin prickled as if 1,000 unseen eyes had fixed on me. I stumbled back, convincing myself it was some strange resonance, a trick of acoustics. But the part of me that still believed in reason was shrinking fast, swallowed by something older and darker stirring beneath the surface of this place. The cabin's history clung to it like smoke. Locals had spoken little when I signed the rental papers, offering only sidelong glances and clipped warnings. Don't stay past sundown. Keep the windows shut. It sounded like superstition, the kind that grows around forgotten places. But curiosity gnawed at me, so I searched online. Buried in old newspaper scans was a story. A family of 4 had vanished here in 1979. No signs of struggle, no footprints leaving the property. Just an empty cabin, supper half eaten, a door left ajar. I should have left then. Instead, I stayed, because curiosity is a crueler captor than fear. That night, the whispers returned, louder, more insistent, threading through the walls like veins. My name bled into phrases I couldn't quite decipher. Sometimes they sounded like pleas, other times like warnings. I lit every lamp, foolishly thinking light would push back the dark. But darkness isn't just the absence of light. It's a presence, and it had already settled in. At 3:12 a.m., the whispers shifted into something unmistakable, a scream. Sharp and distant, yet it vibrated through the wood beneath my fingertips. My pulse hammered as I pressed my ear against the grain again, listening to a story I wasn't meant to hear. The walls were trying to speak, to tell me something buried with the silence. But about what, or who, I couldn't yet understand. And as I stood there in the dark, heart rattling like a trapped bird, I had the terrible sense that understanding might come too late. The scream did not fade. It frayed like cloth torn by invisible hands. I stepped back and the lamps trembled, filaments whining like hornets. The window turned into a dark mirror. My face was wax pale, a lighthouse with its bulb exhausted. The room smelled of wet ash, though the hearth lay cold. When the noise thinned to hush, another sound rose. 3 wooden knocks, spaced like a heart relearning rhythm. I rapped my knuckles once. The cabin answered back. I should have fled, yet I leaned close and asked what it wanted. My breath left like smoke and vanished. The wood breathed back one word, down, maybe imagination. But what if it wasn't? Curiosity slipped its leash, reckless. I pulled the rug, found the trapdoor I'd pretended not to see, and lifted. The hinges spoke in rust. Cold air rose from the dark like water from a well, carrying the mineral tang of stone and something faintly sweet. The ladder complained under my weight. Each rung felt slick, as if too many damp hands had used it. My flashlight drilled a thin tunnel through the dark, the beam a coin tossed into a throat that never hit bottom. Halfway down, drawings appeared on packed clay, 4 stick figures under a peaked roof, a sun with pinwheel rays. Small handprints had dried into fossils. I pressed my palm to one. It held no heat, denying my permission. The tunnel leveled into a crawl space where the air moved with purposeful chill, like a doctor's gloved hand. Voices braided around me, mother's hush, father's gravel-soft cadence, a boy's quick staccato. Separate threads, one message turned back. Don't call again. Call what? My light skimmed a recess and found a dented tin lunchbox. Inside lay a rusted key, a water-warped photograph, and a braid of blonde hair tied with red thread gone the color of dried leaves. My mouth tasted iron. The photograph had bled at the edges, yet the faces were sharp. The missing family stared out in grayscale, mother, father, daughter, and a fourth face crowded the corner, mine. Not resemblance, not a shadow's joke. My face, younger by decades, printed into a memory that should not know me. The beam jittered and found a splintered door barred from the outside with iron staples and a wooden brace wedged like a bone. Something beyond exhaled dust. I levered the brace loose. The cabin above creaked, shifting its weight to watch. Behind the door, the whispering thickened into hoarse weather. The room beyond was small, lined with tool-scarred planks. In the center stood a chair, its seat polished by hours. Rope lay coiled at its feet like a sleeping snake. On the plank behind it, scrawled in charcoal at child height, a command: don't let him in. The letters were smudged by frantic fingers. Upstairs, every lamp died at once. Darkness pressed close, damp and familial. Then I understood. The cabin hadn't tried to chase me out. It had tried to keep me from unbarring the door it once failed to guard. A scraping inhale rose behind me like lungs filling after years underwater. It knew my name the way a hymn knows its refrain. Hinges sighed. Cold rushed forward. The truth arrived like a warmed blade. I wasn't a visitor. I was the call. The storm rolled in without warning, a low growl across the lake that deepened into a chorus of wind and water. I stood by the cabin window, watching rain stitch silver threads into the black surface when I saw it, a flicker of orange light swaying across the lake. At first I thought it was a reflection of lightning or a fisherman caught in the downpour, but the glow was too steady, too deliberate. It moved with the rhythm of a handheld lantern, cutting a lone path through the rain as if guided by purpose. And there was no boat. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass. The lake had no docks on that side, no cabins, no roads, only dense pine forest swallowing the shore. Yet the lantern drifted closer, the glow pulsing like a heartbeat against the dark. My rational mind scrambled for answers. Bioluminescent algae, a stray camper, tricks of light in the rain. But beneath every explanation lurked a question I couldn't shake. Who or what could walk across water? I didn't sleep that night. By dawn, the storm had passed and the lake lay still, glass smooth and innocent, as if it had never held that phantom glow. But when I stepped outside, my boots sank into deep impressions in the wet earth, muddy footprints leading from the water's edge straight to my door. They stopped there, perfectly centered before the threshold, as if whoever left them had been standing and watching. The weight of it settled on me slowly, like a cold hand on my shoulder. Something had been here, and it had come to me. Locals always spoke of the lake in lowered voices, their stories braided with warnings. They said a man had drowned here decades ago, searching for his lost daughter after she vanished on the water. His lantern had been found drifting near the shore, still burning. Some swore they'd seen it moving across the lake on stormy nights, a ghost searching for what he could never find. Folklore, I told myself. Grief twists memory into myth. But the footprints, wet, heavy, human, clung to reality in a way myths never could. That night the wind rose again, howling through the trees like something wounded. I stood by the shore, flashlight in hand, waiting. Hours passed. Then, as if summoned by my doubt, the lantern returned. Its glow slid silently across the lake, closer this time, its light haloed by mist that rolled low and slow like breath on glass. I felt it then, not fear but invitation, as though the light wasn't warning me away but asking me to follow. I stepped into the shallows, the water biting cold through my boots. The lantern paused as if noticing. Then it retreated, pulling deeper into the lake. I followed, each step sinking into silt until the shore vanished behind me. The light pulsed once, twice, and disappeared. The water stilled. The night exhaled, and beneath that breath, something shifted below the surface. Something large, waist before I stopped, moving toward me. The cold wrapped around me like a living thing, gripping bone and breath, pulling me deeper with every hesitant step. The lantern was gone, swallowed by the dark lake as if it had never been there. But the silence it left behind was worse. Heavy, waiting, a held breath from something older than memory. Then the ripples changed. Not wind, not current. Movement. Something circling beneath me, slow and deliberate, like a predator deciding if I was worth the effort. I turned back toward shore, but the cabin lights had vanished behind a wall of fog. The world had shrunk to water and darkness, and I was stranded in its heart. Then the lantern flared again, not ahead of me this time, but below. Its light pulsed faintly through the water, far deeper than I could reach, rising and fading like a heartbeat under ice. Against every rational impulse I dove. The shock of cold stole the air from my lungs, and the world dissolved into black and orange. Shapes coalesced as my eyes adjusted. Not one lantern, but many, hundreds of faint glows drifting along the lakebed like a drowned constellation. And among them, outlines of things that once had names. A bicycle half buried in silt, a porcelain doll's head staring sightless upward, the curved ribs of an old wooden boat. And there, tangled in lakeweed, the remains of a man still clutching a rusted lantern in skeletal fingers. His skull was tilted skyward as if even in death he'd been searching. Something brushed my ankle. I kicked hard, breaking the surface with a gasp, but the water around me churned now, alive with unseen motion. The lantern rose again ahead of me, steady and patient, like a guide. And beneath it, deeper still, a smaller, dimmer glow. A second lantern, weaker but pulsing in perfect rhythm with the first. Father and daughter. The thought was not mine, but it lodged in my mind all the same. Was the man still searching? Or had he found her, and now called for someone else? The water surged suddenly, and something broke the surface. Not a body, but a shape slick with weeds and mud, rising slowly until a pale, waterlogged hand reached toward me. My scream drowned in the wind. It wasn't clawing or attacking. It was pointing. Back toward shore. Back to the footprints. Back to the cabin. I stumbled through the shallows, lungs burning, heart battering my ribs. The lantern's light followed, gliding across the water with unhurried grace until it reached the shore and stopped. Muddy footprints bloomed behind it, fresh and heavy, leading not to my door this time, but away from it, into the forest. And as I stared, breath fogging in the cold air, the truth settled over me like frost. The lake hadn't tried to lure me down. It had tried to show me the path something else had taken. Somewhere beyond those trees, something was still searching. And now it wasn't searching the lake anymore. I came here to escape noise and found a silence that speaks. That lantern wasn't a ghost story. It was a message, a grief too deep for the grave. And as long as that light still moves across the water, something out there isn't finished. Maybe it never will be. We hadn't planned to come here for ghosts. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. 4 of us, a row of cabins tucked into the pines, and nothing but the sound of rain on rooftops to drown out the noise of our city lives. Cabins 1 through 6 were identical, warm, rustic, smelling faintly of cedar and old stories. But cabin 7 was different. It sat slightly apart, shadowed by an ancient oak whose branches clawed at its roof like fingers. Its windows were boarded, its door padlocked, its porch swallowed by moss. It didn't belong, not to the resort, not to the present. It looked like a memory that had refused to fade. The caretaker mentioned it once, almost reluctantly, when handing us the keys. 7's off limits, he muttered, sliding past the question of why. Don't go near it. Nothing good ever comes from waking what's asleep. We laughed, of course. The way people laugh when they're trying to convince themselves they're not intrigued. But from the moment we arrived, cabin 7 pulled at our attention like a lodestone. It wasn't just abandoned. It felt watched, as though something behind those boards was listening for our footsteps. By the second night, curiosity outweighed caution. Rain hammered the pines and wind moaned through the gaps, but we grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the forbidden door. The padlock was rusted, more symbolic than secure. One twist and it fell into my hand. The hinges groaned as if resenting the intrusion, and stale, cold air exhaled from the darkness beyond. Inside, time had stopped decades ago. Beds were still unmade, quilts slouched in mid-fall. Plates with brittle crumbs sat on a table set for 4. A kettle rusted into silence on the stove. It was as if the inhabitants had stood up mid-dinner and vanished. Then I saw the diary. It lay on a nightstand, its leather cracked with age, its pages yellowed and fragile. The last entry ended mid-sentence. "If anyone ever finds this, tell them we..." The rest was nothing but a jagged ink trail, frozen as if the writer's hand had been yanked away mid-thought. My fingers trembled as I closed it. Something about the incompleteness felt wrong, like an unfinished breath. A place abandoned is sad, a place interrupted is haunted. We sealed the door behind us, laughing nervously about how overhyped it all was. But later that night, long after the others had drifted to sleep, I woke to the unmistakable sound of footsteps pacing just beyond the wall. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be an animal. They circled, paused, then circled again. The measured rhythm of someone thinking, waiting, counting. My breath caught as I stared at the dark ceiling. Cabin 7 was empty. We had locked it ourselves. At dawn, the rain had stopped. Birds sang, and one of us was gone. We searched the trails, the lake, the other cabins. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of struggle. Only a thin layer of dust disturbed on Cabin 7's floor, and on the open diary, a new line scrawled in unfamiliar ink. 5. But there were only 4 of us. We stood in that doorway too long, staring at the single word inked into the diary's page. 5. It wasn't there the night before. I knew it. Every curve of that crooked hand looked fresh, the ink darker than the brittle lines around it. But the question sank deeper than when or how. It was who. We were 4 when we arrived, 4 when we went to bed. Now one was gone, and the cabin believed there were 5. We split up, though every instinct screamed against it. The forest swallowed sound. Our shouts came back muffled and strange, as if spoken into water. No broken branches, no signs of a struggle. It was as though they had stepped off the face of the earth. By noon, fear had settled into us like a second skin. We gathered back in Cabin 7, a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable. The room hadn't changed. Dust still clung to every surface, the kettle still slumped on the stove. But the air was wrong now, charged like the pause before thunder. Something clinked beneath my boot. A spoon, the same tarnished silver from the table, now lying in the center of the floor as if deliberately placed. Next to it, another plate had appeared, rimmed in a thin film of wet earth. And beside that, on the wall where once there was nothing, a mark. A single handprint smeared in dust, too small to belong to any of us. My stomach turned. The table was now set for 5. We searched again that evening, though none of us said aloud what we were thinking. Whoever or whatever had taken our friend was playing a game. As the sun bled out behind the trees, footsteps echoed once more from within Cabin 7. Only this time, we were inside. They circled around us, though nothing moved, a loop of pacing too deliberate to be wind or settling wood. And beneath that rhythm, a whisper. Not words, not yet, but the cadence of language forming in the walls themselves. The diary was open again. A new sentence snaked across the page in that same jagged ink. They always come back to finish the meal. My hands shook as I turned the brittle pages. More words appeared even as I watched, curling like smoke into sentences about those who entered uninvited, and numbers that must be made whole. It wasn't just recounting the past. It was writing now. The lanterns failed. The room plunged into a darkness so thick it felt alive. And in that blackness, something brushed my arm. Not a hand, not skin, but something colder, emptier, like the shadow of a person. A shape took form beside me, then another. 5 in total, standing where only 3 of us remained. My breath turned to ice. When the lights sputtered back to life, I was alone. The diary lay open on the table. One last entry waited for me. 4. The police never found the others. They said people vanish in these woods all the time. But every year since, I've returned to Cabin 7, drawn by something I can't explain. The door is always locked. The table is always set for 5. And the diary waits, blank but expectant, as if it's counting down to the moment I finally sit back down to finish the story. Alive was just poetry, a romantic way of describing the sway of trees and the chatter of leaves. That illusion shattered the moment I stepped into those woods. They were alive, yes, but not in the way poets dream. They were alive the way lungs are alive, the way a sleeping animal stirs beneath its fur. The air felt thicker here, charged, as though the soil itself was drawing breath. And beneath the floorboards of the cabin, I could swear I heard it, a deep rhythmic pulse rising from the earth. The first night was subtle. The trees outside rustled in a pattern too deliberate to be wind. The ground, soft and damp from last week's rain, seemed to rise and fall underfoot, almost imperceptibly, like the chest of something enormous sleeping just below the surface. Even my dog Scout, a stubborn shepherd who never feared anything, refused to step beyond the porch. He sat rigid, ears pinned, eyes fixed on the tree line as if watching a predator that I couldn't see. His hackles rose every time the breeze shifted, every time the forest exhaled. I told myself it was imagination, the product of isolation and too much coffee. But that illusion began to crumble the second night. I woke around 2:30 a.m., unsure why, until I realized the silence was gone. In its place was a low, drawn-out sound, soft and steady, a sigh. It wasn't wind through the pines. It wasn't an animal's call. It was deeper, heavier, like the air itself was being inhaled and released through some vast and hidden lung. Each breath rattled the windows. Each exhale made the walls shudder ever so slightly, as though the cabin were resting on a chest that was rising beneath it. Curiosity wrestled with fear, until curiosity won. I stepped outside into the darkness, the night air cold enough to bite. The forest loomed before me, impossibly still, as if frozen mid-motion. Yet the ground under my boots shifted in slow, deliberate waves. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't runoff beneath the soil. It was breathing. Every few seconds, the swell would rise again, lifting me half an inch, then sink, taking the earth with it. I pressed my palm to the dirt, and for the briefest moment I felt warmth. Not surface warmth, but something deeper, like the pulse of blood moving far below. Scout whimpered behind me, his tail tucked tight. He wouldn't leave the porch, and for the first time I envied his instinct. Because when the sigh returned, closer now, heavier, it wasn't just the ground that moved. The trees shifted, their trunks bending almost imperceptibly inward, as if drawn toward a heartbeat buried beneath the forest floor. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The ground stilled, the air fell silent, even the insects had vanished into hush. I turned to go back inside, and that's when I felt it. A faint, steady thump beneath my feet. Then another, like the slow, deliberate beating of a heart the size of the forest itself. And it was getting stronger. I stood there, frozen, my hand still pressed against the trembling soil. The thumping grew steadier, stronger, as if something colossal beneath the surface had shifted from restless dreams into slow awakening. Each beat rolled through the ground and up my legs, a pulse that was not mine, yet somehow syncopated with my heart. Scout barked once, a sharp, panicked sound, then bolted back into the cabin. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just sound or vibration. This was life. At dawn, I scoured the woods for answers, clinging to science like a shield. Maybe there was volcanic activity, I reasoned, or trapped groundwater shifting below. Yet nothing fit. This wasn't random movement. It was too regular, too intentional. Even the trees seemed tethered to the rhythm, their roots rising with each surge and settling with every lull, like capillaries feeding into a deeper vein. The forest floor bore no cracks or sinkholes, just subtle ridges, looping and converging like scars beneath the skin. It wasn't until the third night that I saw it. I was sitting on the porch, half asleep, when the forest moved, not in metaphor, but in truth. Trees swayed without wind, their trunks bending with an eerie synchronicity, as though responding to a signal I couldn't hear. The soil rippled outward from a point deeper in the woods, a slow wave that lifted pebbles and scattered leaves. I watched in disbelief as a fallen branch, long dead and stripped of bark, shifted an inch on its own, nudged by something pushing beneath it. The ground wasn't just breathing anymore. It was stirring. By now, Scout refused to eat. He paced restlessly, ears flicking toward the tree line at every unseen sound. Animals know before we do. They always have. And part of me wanted to flee too, to run until the forest was a memory in the rearview mirror. But another part, the same part that once believed the woods were just trees, needed to know what lay beneath. So I followed the pulse. It led me nearly a mile from the cabin, where the trees grew older and stranger. Their roots twisted above the soil like knotted fingers, and the air smelled different, heavier, metallic, tinged with rot and rain. The heartbeat was louder here, so powerful it rattled in my chest. And then the ground shifted before me. Not a ripple this time, but a swell rising slowly as if something vast was pressing upward. The soil cracked, not violently but deliberately, in a long circular line. It wasn't random. It was shaping something. The swell sank back down, leaving the earth whole once more. But the message was unmistakable. This wasn't seismic. This wasn't geological. It was biological. Something immense and ancient lay beneath this forest, sleeping, or maybe waiting. And whatever it wasn't dormant anymore. Back at the cabin, Scout was gone. No leash, no trail, no sound. Just the door hanging open and his collar resting neatly on the porch as if placed there. As I picked it up, the ground beneath me pulsed again. Harder this time, shaking dust from the rafters. And in that moment, the forest exhaled once more, a slow, cavernous breath that smelled faintly of something alive. I came here thinking the woods were my refuge, but now I understand I was never a guest. I was a variable, a piece of something vast and breathing and awake. And if this forest is alive, then perhaps it has always known I was here. And perhaps it has been waiting for me far longer than I ever realized. The first time I saw her, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight, a shape where there shouldn't be one, framed in a window that no longer existed. It was 2:13 a.m., the hour when the forest holds its breath, when the world seems to teeter between waking and dreaming. I had just stepped away from the fire to get water, and there she was. Across the clearing, a woman in a pale, soaked dress, hair clinging to her face like wet vines, standing behind the glass of a cabin that wasn't there. The building that once stood in that clearing had burned down 35 years ago. Nothing remained but a foundation swallowed by moss and time. She didn't move at first. She just stared, her face drained of color but not expression. There was a softness to it, almost pleading, like someone waiting to be recognized. Then slowly she raised her hand and waved. It was such a simple gesture, so painfully human that I found myself stepping closer before reason caught up with me. There was nothing to wave back at. No cabin, no window, only the skeletal remains of charred stone under the pale wash of moonlight. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the cabin's old wood sounded like footsteps circling the clearing. When dawn finally clawed its way through the trees, I went to investigate. Up close, the spot was unremarkable, just crumbling stones, half swallowed by moss and ferns. Yet the earth here was damp, as if rain had fallen on this one patch alone. And in that dampness were footprints, bare, human, leading nowhere. The locals didn't laugh when I asked. They only grew quiet. She drowned before the fire, an old shopkeeper told me, as if reading a headline he'd memorized long ago. Lake was swollen that year. She was trying to save her little girl. Didn't make it. The cabin burned weeks later. Husband never spoke again. I asked if anyone had seen her. He stared at me for a long time and said, "Only the ones she chooses." I told myself I wouldn't look again. That I'd close the curtains, sleep through 2:13, pretend I'd imagined it all. But the next night I was back at the window long before the hour came, breath fogging the glass, pulse thudding like a countdown. And right on time she appeared. Same pale dress, same water-dark hair, same wave. But this time something was different. The faint outline of the window frame around her shimmered like heat on asphalt. And for a heartbeat, it was as though the cabin itself had returned, whole, upright, alive again. She waved longer this time, more insistently, and though every instinct screamed at me not to, I raised my hand and waved back. The forest fell silent. The night held its breath. And in that silence, my reflection vanished from the glass, erased as though I'd never been there. And then she stepped forward, the forest around me shifted. The clearing I had stared at for 2 nights was gone, swallowed by something deeper, older. I was no longer looking out from my cabin. I was peering in through hers. The glass beneath my fingertips was cold and rippled, like the surface of a lake in winter. Her face hovered inches from mine on the other side, the details sharp now, eyes the color of river stones, lips tinged blue, strands of wet hair glued to her cheeks. And still that wave, slower now, almost ceremonial, as if it were less a greeting and more a summons. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of smoke and wet earth. Behind her, the burned-out cabin was no longer ruin. It stood whole and alive again, bathed in a golden glow that didn't belong to the moon. Shadows danced on its walls, the shapes of furniture, of life, of a family frozen mid-moment. Somewhere deeper inside, a child laughed. The sound was faint but clear, threading through the night like a memory refusing to die. I stumbled back, heart hammering. My cabin floor was still beneath me, the same familiar boards, but the view through the window refused to return to what it had been. It wasn't my clearing anymore. It was hers. And as I stared, the woman pressed her palm against the glass. Water beaded beneath her skin, trickling down in rivulets. Instinct tugged at me. Press your hand to hers. And this, understand it. But reason fought back with sharp, cold clarity. If I touch her, something changes. And something did change, even without my hand. The condensation spreading across the window was on my side now. Cold water dripping onto the sill. The temperature in the room plummeted. Breath fogged before my lips. And then, faintly at first, but growing stronger, came the sound of water lapping gently against wood. Impossible. The lake was half a mile from here. Yet there it was, a steady rhythm of waves, as if the cabin had been dropped into its center. Then came the voice, soft, lullaby soft. It seeped from the window and into the walls, curling around me like a current. "She's still waiting," it whispered. She never stopped. And in that moment I saw it. Not a woman reaching for help, but a mother forever caught in the act of saving a child she could not reach. Her story wasn't about the fire. It wasn't even about the drowning. It was about the moment between, the split second where hope still breathed and love refused to let go. The window flashed with light, orange, violent, devouring. Flames tore through the vision, swallowing the cabin whole. And through it all, the woman's face did not change. She kept waving, not as a call for me to come closer, but as a warning. Not again. Not you. When I blinked, the clearing was back. The charred stones, the moss, the silence. My reflection stared back at me once more, but faint, pale, as if seen through water. I've drawn the curtains every night since, but I still wake at 2:13. I don't look anymore. I don't have to, because I know she's there, caught forever between drowning and flame, between reaching and warning. And maybe the window was never meant for me to see her at all. Maybe it was meant to show me how thin the glass is between the living and the lost. The radio was older than the cabin itself, a hulking relic built into the wall, its knobs stiff with rust, its speaker veiled in a skin of dust and cobwebs. It had been dead for decades, the caretaker told me. Decorative now, he'd said with a shrug. A ghost of a different era. I believed him, until the night it came alive. It started with a hiss. A thin thread of static that crawled out of the silence like the breath of something waking. I was reading by lantern light when the crackle deepened into a low hum, then fractured into bursts of noise, like syllables breaking free from a forgotten language. I froze, staring at the speaker. There was no electricity in this cabin, nothing that should have powered it. Yet the radio coughed again, louder this time, and beneath the static I caught what sounded like a word. Then another. A voice, distant, distorted, but unmistakably human. I leaned closer, my breath shallow, as the fragments formed into a sentence. "Don't look at the window." My head snapped toward the glass, instinct winning over reason. Nothing there, just darkness and rain sliding down the pane in thin silver rivers. My heart pounded, the warning echoing in my skull. Don't look. But at what? The radio fell silent as abruptly as it had spoken. Hours passed before I slept, and when I did, my dreams were filled with whispers bleeding through static. Voices without faces, calling my name from somewhere I couldn't see. I woke tangled in sweat and sheets, the cabin still and dark. Too still, too dark. Then, as if sensing I was awake, the radio crackled again. This time it wasn't a warning. It was a description. Footsteps. 15 seconds. I glanced at the door. Nothing. 14. The numbers dropped, steady as a metronome. 13. I held my breath, half convinced this was some elaborate prank, half terrified it wasn't. 10. I backed away. 8. My pulse roared in my ears. 5. I gripped the edge of the table. 3. Silence. Then came the footsteps. They started faint, as if from deep in the woods, but grew louder, heavier, more deliberate. They stopped right outside the cabin door. I stared at the handle, waiting for it to turn. It never did. After a long, agonizing minute, the footsteps retreated, fading into the night until they were gone. The radio gave a low, crackling laugh. Not a human laugh, not quite, but something close enough to chill me to the bone. The next night, it escalated. The radio spoke of things that hadn't happened yet. A gust of wind strong enough to rattle the shutters, a fox crying in the distance, my cup spilling over the floor. Each one unfolded exactly as described, each prediction more precise, more invasive. And then, at 3:17 a.m., the voice returned, softer now, almost tender. You will scream in 19 minutes. I stared at the speaker, heart hammering. Nothing in the room had changed. No intruder, no danger, but the voice was certain. 19 minutes, and I couldn't stop watching the clock. I told myself I wouldn't give the voice the satisfaction. I'd stay calm. I'd refuse to scream. But the moment I decided that, the countdown began again. 18, 17, 16. It ticked down like a heart monitor from another world. My eyes darted around the cabin, searching for anything, anyone that could make me lose control. Nothing moved. The wind had died. Even the forest had gone silent, as if the whole night was holding its breath. 10. The voice sounded closer now, no longer buried in static. It felt like it was inside the room. 5. I gripped the chair until my knuckles blanched. 3. The scream tore from me before I understood why. A crash erupted behind me, wood splintering, metal clanging, and something heavy slammed against the far wall. I spun hard in my throat and saw the lantern I'd left hanging by the door lying shattered on the floor. Its metal hook was bent at an impossible angle, as if twisted by a hand I couldn't see. My body shook. The radio hadn't predicted an event. It had caused one. I wanted to leave, but curiosity had its claws in me now. This was more than coincidence. The radio knew things it shouldn't. It wasn't warning me of the future, it was writing it. And I needed to know how far that power reached. The next message came the following night, calm and unhurried. The knock will come at 2:11. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, eyes on the clock. When the second hand brushed past the mark, 3 slow knocks echoed through the cabin walls. They weren't on the door. They were inside, from the wall where the radio sat. The wood shuddered with each impact, dust drifting down like ash. Something behind the wall was trying to get out. I pressed my ear against the boards. Silence. Then a whisper so faint I thought I'd imagined it. We're still here. My blood went cold. We. Not I. Not one voice. Many. As if the static had always been a crowd, waiting for someone to listen. On the 4th night, the voice shed all pretense. There was no static, no distance. It spoke with perfect clarity. You will die in 37 minutes. The words were precise, sterile, delivered like a weather report. My stomach twisted. How? I whispered into the empty cabin, hating myself for asking. The radio answered without hesitation. Not by what's outside, by what's already inside. The clock began to tick louder, crueler. I checked every corner, every door, every shadow. Nothing. 30 minutes, 20, 15. My breath turned shallow. At 7 minutes, the air shifted, colder, heavier, like the cabin itself was inhaling. At 3, the floorboards creaked behind me. At 1, I turned. Nothing. Then the radio spoke one final time. Not you. And the cabin moved. The wall split with a sound like tearing flesh. And from the darkness behind it, something stepped forward. Not a person, not a creature, but a shape made of whispering voices and black static. It leaned close enough for me to feel its breath and said almost gently, "You've been listening from the wrong side." The radio never spoke again. The cabin stands empty now, its walls sealed, its silence unbroken. But if you stand close enough on the coldest nights, you can still hear faint static bleeding through the wood, as if something inside is waiting for a chance to broadcast faster than we expected. A white wall devouring the tree line and sealing us inside the cabin like insects trapped in amber. At first it was beautiful, Snow drifting past the windows in silent sheets, the fire crackling in the hearth. The four of us cocooned in warmth and laughter. Outside, the world vanished under a shroud of white. Inside, it was easy to believe nothing could touch us. But snow has a way of burying more than landscapes. It buries warnings too, and the first sign was so small we almost ignored it. It came on the third night, just past midnight, a faint scritch from deep inside the chimney. We froze mid-conversation. Another scritch, followed by a soft drag like claws raking against brick. A raccoon, someone said. Maybe a squirrel. But no animal scratches like that. Slow, deliberate, pausing every few seconds as if listening. We tried to laugh it off, but the sound returned the next night. Louder, closer. It echoed down the flue like something climbing toward the light. By the fifth night, sleep had become impossible. The scratching had turned frantic, a desperate, ceaseless clatter of nails on stone. Then silence, an awful, heavy silence that pressed against the cabin walls. It lasted for hours, long enough that we convinced ourselves whatever it was had given up. But when morning came, fine black soot dusted the floor beneath the fireplace. None of us had touched the chimney, and none of us wanted to. The snow deepened, swallowing the world beyond the porch. Doors froze shut, windows sealed in sheets of ice. We were marooned, and the cabin, once comforting, began to feel like a coffin. That night, the scratching returned, but this time, it was accompanied by a sound far worse, a wet, labored breath dragging itself through the flue. We stood there holding our breath, listening to it inch closer. The fire hissed and spat as flakes of soot drifted from above, settling like black snow on the glowing logs. Then it stopped. A single heartbeat of silence, and the chimney exhaled. Soot burst into the room, swirling in the firelight. Something heavy struck the hearth with a dull thud. We stumbled back as the thing uncurled itself in the glow of the embers. It was small, the size of a child, but grotesquely human-shaped, skin pale as wax and stretched too tight over spindly bones. Its eyes were pits of darkness, its mouth a trembling slit that opened and closed without sound. It shuddered once, then turned its head toward me. It knew me. I felt it in the marrow of my bones. It tilted its head in recognition, lips peeling into a jagged imitation of a smile. And then, in a voice that sounded like soil sliding over a coffin lid, it whispered my name. The fire guttered. The storm screamed against the walls, and the thing that had clawed its way down the chimney began to crawl toward me on all fours. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body was rooted to the spot as the pale thing crept closer, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette tugged by invisible strings. Each limb bent too far, joints popping as it crawled across the floorboards. And it never blinked. Those hollow eyes stayed locked on me, unblinking and aware, as though they had been waiting a long, long time for this moment. My name slipped from its mouth again, softer this time, almost tender, as if it weren't calling to me but claiming me. Someone screamed behind me. I think it was Emma, and that broke the spell. We bolted for the door, but it was sealed shut by ice, the handle frozen solid. The windows too were crusted over, the storm howling against them like a living thing. We were trapped. The creature paused a few feet away, its head cocking to the side in that same eerie, childlike gesture, and then it began to climb. Not toward us, but up the wall, scaling the stone like a spider until it vanished into the darkness of the rafters above. The cabin fell silent except for our ragged breathing. We waited, straining to hear any sound from above. Minutes dragged by, nothing. Then a soft pat on the floor. We turned. A single blackened handprint had appeared by the hearth, fingers long and thin, splayed like roots clawing for soil. Another appeared by the door, then another near the window. It wasn't hiding anymore. It was marking the room. The wind outside rose to a scream. Snow hammered the windows, and then, from every wall, a new sound. Scratching. Not from the chimney this time, but from inside the walls themselves. Dozens of nails dragging across wood, circling us like wolves. The thing was no longer alone. Or maybe it never had been. "Stay together," I whispered, though my voice trembled so violently it barely sounded human. But the moment I spoke, something dropped from the rafters, not onto the floor, but directly onto Tom. He barely had time to shout before it latched onto his back, its limbs folding around him like a cocoon. He thrashed and screamed as the thing pressed its face to his ear and whispered words none of us could understand. Then it released him and scuttled back into the shadows. Tom collapsed, gasping. But when he lifted his head, his eyes were wrong, vacant and glassy, staring at nothing. "It's free now," he said in a voice that wasn't his own. It was never trying to get in. The storm broke the next morning. The sky was a cold, washed-out blue, the snow glittering under pale light. We left the cabin in silence, not daring to look back. But as we reached the tree line, I turned once and froze. The chimney was clean. No soot, no claw marks, as if nothing had crawled through it at all. But in the snow below, leading away from the cabin and vanishing into the forest, were dozens of blackened handprints, not footprints, as if something had walked out on its hands and disappeared into the trees. I never saw Tom again. He left that night without a word, and no one's heard from him since. But sometimes, when the wind howls through my chimney back home, I swear I hear my name whispered in that same broken voice. Patient, waiting, as though whatever crawled free from that cabin isn't finished with me yet. It started with a loose board near the foot of my bed, a small, annoying wobble I'd meant to fix since the day I arrived. On the third night, unable to sleep, I pried it up with a screwdriver. Beneath it lay more than dust and forgotten nails. A brittle sheet of yellowed paper was tucked into the hollow space, folded and refolded until its edges had fused together like fragile skin. It was a map, hand-drawn in ink that had long since bled into the fibers. It showed a sprawling network of tunnels and chambers, a labyrinth stretching deep beneath the cabin. At first, I thought it was history. Remnants of an old mining project, perhaps, from when these woods had been picked apart for coal and copper. But this wasn't the crude grit of industrial work. It was organic, winding, too deliberate to be random. And in the center, drawn with darker ink and a steadier hand, was a symbol, a spiral marked directly beneath where my bed now stood. That small detail, that unnerving precision, unsettled me more than anything else. Whoever drew this map didn't just know about the tunnels. They knew this cabin. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone had lived here decades ago. Maybe they were just documenting what was already there. But that night I couldn't shake the image of that spiral. I lay awake, staring at the floor beneath me, imagining miles of darkness just inches below, coiling like veins through the earth. It felt less like I was sleeping above empty space and more like I was lying on a sealed tomb. By morning, curiosity had eclipsed caution. I widened the gap beneath the board, shining a flashlight into the crawl space below. Dust swirled in the beam, and something else. Scattered beneath the joists were objects that didn't belong to time. A half-burned candle stub, a rusted tin mug, a child's wooden toy smudged with soil. They weren't relics buried by time. They were recent. Someone had been down there, not years ago, but weeks. My hands trembled as I pushed deeper into the narrow space, the wood groaning beneath my weight. At the far end, a section of soil looked disturbed, looser than the rest. My pulse quickened. I pressed my hand against it. It was cold, colder than the surrounding earth, damp like breath on glass. And beneath that dampness, faint but undeniable, was the sound of air moving. Slowly, steadily, as if the tunnels were inhaling. That night, I dreamed of passageways twisting like intestines beneath the ground, leading not outward but upward, toward me. I woke gasping, my skin clammy with sweat. A draft slipped through the floorboards, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and something else. Something stale, like a room sealed too long. And in the silence that followed, I swore I heard a sound rising from beneath the cabin. A soft rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on wood from the other side. It was coming from directly beneath my bed. It kept a steady rhythm, patient and deliberate, as though whoever, or whatever, was below knew I was awake and was waiting for me to respond. I sat frozen in the dark, every muscle tensed, staring at the floor inches from where the sound pulsed through the wood. Then, after what felt like hours, it stopped. Silence returned, but not the comforting kind. This silence felt aware, like it was listening. At dawn, I tore the rest of the floorboards loose. If something was down there, I needed to know. The gap beneath the cabin was narrow but navigable, a shallow crawl space coated in dust and damp clay. My flashlight cut a thin tunnel of light through the darkness. There, near the spot marked by the spiral on the map, was a section of earth that looked disturbed again, scraped back by hand. I dug at it, breath held, until my fingers struck wood, a small hatch, flush with the ground. It wasn't part of the cabin's construction. It was older. The hatch creaked open to reveal a vertical shaft lined with bricks and wooden supports, a staircase carved directly into the packed earth. The air that rose from it was stale and heavy, tinged with the metallic scent of wet stone. I should have stopped there. Every instinct screamed at me to replace the boards, seal it all back up, and leave. But curiosity is a hunger, and hunger doesn't listen to reason. I descended. The tunnel was narrower than I expected, forcing me to crouch as I moved. My flashlight beam jittered across the walls, revealing strange markings etched into the dirt, symbols like the one from the map, repeating again and again, spirals within spirals. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell became, mingling earth with something older, almost sweet, the scent of decay. And then abruptly, the tunnel opened into a chamber. It wasn't large, but it was lived in. Bedrolls lined the floor, still indented as though someone had slept there recently. Empty food tins and a cracked lantern sat beside a pile of blankets. And on one wall, nailed into the dirt itself, was another map. This one newer, drawn in pencil and pinned with nails. It showed the same labyrinth, but now the spiral wasn't beneath my bed. It was beneath the door. And beside it, written in a neat, deliberate hand, was a single word: exit. A chill slid through me. This wasn't a guide for someone like me to explore. It was a blueprint, a way for something below to find its way out. And as if to confirm the thought, I felt it again, the draft rising from deeper still. A breath, a movement, something stirring in the dark beyond the chamber. Then the tapping returned, not above this time, but behind me, echoing up the shaft I'd climbed down. It was closer now, louder, coming from inside the cabin. I scrambled back up, heart slamming against my ribs. The room above was empty, floorboards scattered where I'd left them. But in the thin layer of dust beside my bed, 5 long, dirt-streaked fingerprints dragged across the wood, fresh, wet, and leading away from the hatch I had opened. Whatever the map was guiding had found its way up. And it wasn't hiding anymore. I thought the nightmare would stay in the woods. That once I left the cabin behind, its rotting walls, its whispering floors, the claustrophobic weight of its silence, it would all dissolve into memory. For 2 nights after returning home, that illusion held. The city felt loud and alive, neon lights humming above streets that pulsed with people. I convinced myself it had been isolation playing tricks on me, that fear had magnified every creak and shadow into something supernatural. But on the 3rd night, just past 2 a.m., I heard it again. Knock, 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 3 slow strikes. The same rhythm that had echoed through the cabin walls every night I was there. It froze me in bed, heart climbing into my throat. For a long moment I lay still, waiting for a follow-up knock that never came. The hallway beyond my door was empty, washed in the orange glow of the streetlights outside. No one was there, and yet the sound was unmistakable, carrying that same strange weight, as though the wood itself had remembered. I laughed nervously the next morning, trying to rationalize it. Maybe a neighbor, maybe a pipe expanding. The city is full of noises. You can explain away almost anything if you try hard enough. But the following night, the knock returned. 3 beats, patient, unhurried, closer this time. At 2:03 a.m., it came from the inside of my bedroom wall. At 2:07, from the ceiling. And at 2:10, it sounded directly from the headboard of my bed, inches from my skull. I moved into the living room after that, sleeping under the harsh glow of the TV just to feel less alone. But the knocks followed. They stalked me from room to room, always in 3s, always in the same steady rhythm. By the 5th night, they had crawled into my dreams. I'd jolt awake drenched in sweat, certain someone had pounded on my door, only to find silence pressing in around me, except for the faintest echo of wood answering wood, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. And then the reflection started. The first time I thought it was exhaustion, a trick of light and a rain puddle on the street. But there it was, the outline of the cabin, distorted but unmistakable, hunched behind me in the water's surface. Days later, It appeared again in a bus window, its roofline framed by the dark edge of the forest. But when I turned around, all I saw were glass and brick and asphalt. The cabin wasn't there, and yet, in the reflection, it always was, watching, waiting. I tried to convince myself it was symbolic. Trauma lingering, a phantom of fear etched into my mind. But the night I woke to find condensation streaking down my apartment window in the shape of 3 perfect lines, like fingers dragged down glass, I knew this wasn't in my head. The cabin hadn't stayed behind. It had followed me, and it wanted me to let it in. I stopped counting the nights after the 10th. Time lost meaning when I was sleeping in 20-minute bursts, jolted awake by that patient rhythm against the walls. Knock, 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 always 3, always spaced the same. It became a metronome for my fear, steady and unrelenting like a heartbeat buried in the bones of the building. My neighbors swore they heard nothing. Maintenance checked the pipes, the vents, even the wiring inside the walls. Old buildings settle, they said. But this wasn't settling. This was pursuit. It changed on the 12th night. The knocks no longer waited for darkness. They came in daylight, soft at first, a polite tap at the edge of hearing, then bolder, bellowing through plaster and steel. At 3:16 p.m., they rattled my office window on the 24th floor, though there was no balcony outside. At 6:42, they echoed from beneath the floorboards of a subway train. Everywhere I went, the sound followed, as if the cabin had learned my patterns, mapping my life the way it had once mapped the forest. I started seeing the cabin more clearly too. Not just its shape reflected in water or glass, but details. The warped planks, the sagging porch, the thin curl of smoke from a chimney that no longer existed. Sometimes, for a heartbeat, the reflection wasn't behind me at all. It was around me. Streets blurred into pines, apartment walls warped into old wood. The hum of the city dimmed into the hush of distant wind through trees. Then I'd blink, and the world would snap back. But the lingering smell of damp earth and rot said it hadn't been a dream. I grew desperate enough to leave town. I drove for hours, checking into a hotel 3 states away. Certain distance would sever whatever thread bound me to that place. The first night passed in silence. The second too. Relief began to stitch itself into me, until 2:13 a.m. on the 3rd night. The knock came again. Knock, knock, knock. Not on the door this time, but from inside the closet. I threw it open, expecting emptiness, but the smell hit me first. Pine sap, wet soil, and smoke. And there, smeared across the back wall, were 3 black fingerprints, still damp, pressed into the wood from the other side. I understood then. The cabin wasn't a structure bound by earth and timber. It was an idea, a parasite that had taken root in me. It didn't care where I ran. It wasn't following my body. It was following my memory. The next night, I woke gasping from a dream of standing inside that cabin again, except it wasn't abandoned this time. The fire burned bright. Shadows moved just beyond the light, pacing in rhythm with those 3 knocks. And when I looked at the window, I saw my own reflection on the outside, not looking in, but trying to get back in. This morning, I found 3 marks etched into my apartment door, shallow but deliberate, as if made by fingernails. Beneath them, scrawled in soot, was a single word: home. The cabin isn't coming for me anymore. It's calling me back, and deep down, I think I already know a tremor running through the floorboards, a low hum threading the air like a distant heartbeat. But the deeper I moved into the cabin, the stronger it became, as if the entire structure was inhaling after a long sleep. My pulse quickened. It wasn't fear anymore. It was recognition. Every sound, every creak, every shadow was achingly familiar, as though I had never truly left. And maybe in some way I hadn't. The first room was exactly as I remembered it. The table where the soot from the chimney had first fallen. The wall where whispers had once spoken my name. Even the faint scorch marks beneath the window pane, relics of a fire that had happened decades before I was born, still scarred the wood. But there was something new now. The spiral symbol from the map beneath my floorboards, carved deep into the center of the room. It hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had, and I simply hadn't been meant to see it. I knelt to trace the groove with my fingertips. The wood was warm, alive, and beneath it, I felt a slow, deliberate pulse, like the throb of blood through a vein. That's when I heard the voice. Not a whisper this time, but a breathless exhale that seemed to bloom from the walls themselves. "You came back." The words weren't spoken in sound, but in weight, sinking into me the way water seeps into soil. And with them came a realization that chilled me to the core. I wasn't an intruder here. I was expected. The rooms shifted subtly as I moved through them. The radio crackled faintly, even though its cord trailed into nothing. A wet footprint appeared on the floorboards ahead of me, fading before I could reach it. Shadows lingered where no object stood, forming shapes that almost resembled faces I had once seen in the glass. And when I passed the window, I didn't see the forest outside. I saw myself, younger, terrified, staring back from that first night all those years ago. It was then I understood. None of these horrors had been random. The whispers, the woman, the radio, the tapping beneath the floor, they weren't isolated nightmares. They were trials, lessons, preparations. Each encounter was a thread, and I was the needle pulling them together. The cabin wasn't warning me of danger. It was the danger, and I was no longer just its witness. I was part of its design. The hum beneath the floor grew louder, shaking dust from the rafters. The spiral at my feet glowed faintly, its lines pulsing like a heartbeat. And with a sound like a sigh, a long, patient exhale, the cabin spoke again. Not in words, but in certainty. "It's time." I stood there, the weight of years pressing down on me, and felt something shift deep inside, and not fear, not resistance, but belonging. I wasn't here by accident. I had never been. The cabin hadn't haunted me all these years. It had chosen me. When I stepped outside, the forest was gone. In its place stretched a vast, endless expanse of trees and shadows I did not recognize. The cabin behind me pulsed like a living heart, its windows watching as I took my first step forward. I came here to end the story, but the truth settled over me like a shroud. The story isn't ending. It's beginning, and now I am part of what the woods have been waiting for. Subscribe, if you dare.